Hello? Okay. Could everyone get seated, please? Is that on? Ladies? Okay. Okay, everyone please get seated. We'd like to get started. Okay, I'm going to start. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming today in person and for those of you who are able to watch this streaming. This is our ARCS Oregon Leadership Retreat today, which culminates a lot of experience, and we have a full agenda, so I'd like everyone's attention. I'd like to start by summarizing how we got here today. As you know, our chapter has had considerable success since our founding in May 2004. In that first year, in the fall of 2005, we funded 11 scholars in the School of Medicine at OHSU. By contrast, this fall, we will fund 85 scholars in multiple departments and colleges at OHSU, OSU, and UO. Thank you. This growth is fueled by member volunteer efforts for most of the chapter's first 9 years. Fortunately, in 2014, we were able to hire Leanne Verbert as our administrative manager, who has provided invaluable assistance and support since then. Even with the addition of Leanne, volunteer workloads continued to increase for many members. Among other things, this affected leadership recruitment, particularly for the most demanding board positions. By many metrics, we were vital and growing, but by others, we had experienced some decline in our peak membership and our membership dues. We had experienced decreases in revenues from other events. In addition, some contribution revenues had declined. At the same time, we had established, by the end of this year, 29 UMEs managed by our partner university foundations. Recognizing many of these challenges, our past president, Julie Brantford, charged a visioning committee in February 2020 to determine the chapter's optimal staffing for administrative roles and leadership, to determine how to refresh and reinvigorate chapter member engagement, and determine how best to support and enhance philanthropy. The committee's report and recommendations were presented to the board in July 2020, 2 years ago. What immediately followed was an ad hoc strategic implementation committee formed the same month with a subset of the people who had worked on the visioning committee to monitor the plan's implementation with the assistance of Dr. Corky McReynolds from PSU's Nonprofit Institute. Among the accomplishments of this committee were the incorporation of the visioning report recommendations into the long-range plan, board approval for the hiring of an executive director, completion of a letter of intent to the M.J. Murdoch Charitable Trust for a capacity grant to help hire an ED, followed by completion of the full grant application. Work with Corky McReynolds to survey 25 key member leaders to identify key directions for the first executive director, and support for the formation of an ad hoc search and screen committee, develop a position description and other practices to guide the selection of an ED. So what followed from all this? We received a $248,000 Murdoch grant in late August. We had and most importantly, we had a successful search and screen process, which led to the hiring of Lori Slaughter in late November 2021. With Lori's addition as executive director, we now have professional guidance to move the chapter forward to greater success. We all recognize that this requires that the chapter change with respect to having more administrative tasks assumed by staff. We want to plan now how to guide us through this period of transition. Elizabeth has a few comments.
Thank you, Anne. So change. What will change require? Well, let's start with what's not going to change, because this is just a tremendous organization, and we are not going to change our mission, our objectives. We're going to fulfill that mission, which may expand and change over time, but so we need to be more adaptable and more current. Change will require new ways of thinking. One of the thoughts that comes to mind is that sometimes I personally don't realize that I'm not changing, that I'm still stuck in certain beliefs, and it's really hard to shake yourself out of those. So we're going to require new ways of thinking. We're going to require patience. We've come from an organization where we as volunteers have done everything, and we know that we came to a blocking point, a narrowing of our abilities to do everything. And so now we want to be able to expand and to change, and that's going to require us rethinking how we do things as a chapter. But it's an exciting process, and what we'll be doing is creating a new version of our chapter. Anne's going to tell us a little bit about the survey that we did, right?
So you will meet Dr. Sarah Stebbins shortly, and a group of us, which included Lori, Julie Branford, Elizabeth, and myself, worked to identify someone who could consult with us and help us clarify roles and responsibilities. All of our candidates were excellent, but Sarah was the unanimous choice of the group as someone who could really help us at this juncture. And in preparation for this retreat today, in conjunction with Sarah, we prepared a survey, which I'm hoping each of you filled out. We had 62 members respond, which was a substantial response rate. And we wanted to determine where we had agreement and where we did not. And as Elizabeth has just mentioned, an issue of clear agreement is our mission and our chapter's 4 main goals. Also, an area of significant agreement were the benefits that could be achieved by having staff. Where we found some areas, not so much of disagreement, but maybe confusion, was on issues of board governance and how, at this juncture in our chapter, where we go from a board-led organization to a jointly led organization with an ED, how the responsibilities change. And Sarah will help provide today some further input about best practices, board governance, which I think is a useful, is education from which most of us can benefit. So this is the goal of today, is to plan the steps forward. I've been heartened in visiting with Sarah that she's complimented us many times on what we've achieved as a volunteer organization. She has also complimented us on taking this step in inviting her to help us in what is a change management period of our development, that we are doing so at the beginning. Many organizations, in fact, I think most, wait until things are not working well when they've made changes, and we, with Lori's help, have decided that that's not the way we want to proceed. We want this to be successful for everyone involved. So with that, you'll learn more today.
So I think what we're trying to emphasize is that the way we were doing things as an all-volunteer organization was just not sustainable. I personally would have had major anxiety about taking over the president position, having watched what Julie did for 3 years. And I think that was definitely a major factor in all of us having hanging back from volunteering, knowing how time-consuming this was going to be. So we're going on a little journey today to learn about change, about how to adapt to change before we get ourselves into a mess with change. And well, I've heard so much from Sarah about organizations that went through what we're going through without any help. And I've seen a little bit of that in my career as well, with new CEOs taking over and changing things and how badly it went. So we're going to really focus on our 4-chapter goals. The first one is to increase the number of annual scholar awards. Secondly, and this one is, I'm making a very personal mission this year, and that is to engage membership to enhance commitment. We're coming out of the pandemic. We haven't seen each other for a long time. I have a tremendous sense that we need to revitalize the membership. And get a renewed commitment from everybody. And also to get across to them that now that we have an executive director, there are going to be so many more opportunities, and the work is not necessarily going to be so onerous. To sustain and enhance our partnerships with Oregon's leading graduate institutions, we have done that tremendously well for the last 16 years. But as we gain more colleges, more departments within the universities, that's becoming harder and harder for us to do as a group of people, and having someone in a leadership position who can guide us along the way with that will be terribly important. And all of this is to ensure our chapter vitality. We have grown tremendously in the time that we've existed, but we really need to not only re-energize membership, but re-energize our relationships with the universities and with the scholars as they come out of hiding as well. So all of this, of course, is in the context of what other chapters are doing, and so we are so blessed to have Karen in our chapter, who's the national president, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about what national is planning as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you in person. I'm going to be talking to you about leading change at ARCS National. Currently, we have some challenges that we need to face. ARCS National, being an organization almost 65 years old, we'll be celebrating next year 65 years, which is phenomenal. But we are facing multiple challenges to deal with our current times. So I'd like to address 3 immediate challenges that National must address, and they are declining membership in chapters, diversity, equity, and inclusion, U.S. citizenship restrictions for scholar awards. That's probably something you have not heard about yet. Declining membership in chapters. National had an all-time high number of members of 1,617 on June 30th, 2009. On June 30th, 2011, the number of members was 1,569. On June 30th, 2020, membership dropped by 103, so membership is around 1,150. During this 12-year span, 2 chapters dissolved, but those chapters did not have a high significance of members. I was encouraged by reading the chapter annual reports this year that most chapters have reported new members, but what they didn't report is how many have resigned. So I'm pretty sure we're pretty stagnant. So I'm encouraged to hear that membership is going to be a high priority for you, Elizabeth. Different groups have been researching membership engagement trends for over 20 years, and the simple fact is membership decline occurs when associations aren't responsive to the needs, interests, and expectations of their members. When membership decline first made headlines, there was this widespread belief that people aren't joiners anymore. The reality is we've experienced numerous social disruptions, and of course one being COVID. However, before COVID, there was already a decline in membership organizations. It was harder to get people to join, renew, and volunteer. So what changed? People are busier. How members engage in associations and what they want for their membership experiences has changed and will continue to do so. Change is a constant now. Unfortunately, many associations have held steadfast to tradition, resisted change, and backburnered innovation. They forgot that they were membership associations and stopped putting their members' needs and interests first. ARCS has talked about declining membership for years, but we have not changed with the times. During one of our national town hall meetings this year, one member said she had been a membership chair for a number of years in her chapter, and she said that she has done everything possible to get new members, and she's frankly out of new ideas. So this really resonated with me. So National needs to step up to assist chapters in membership. Then diversity, equity, and inclusion. Last June, the National DEI Action Plan Task Force was tasked to deliver a fully developed action plan which includes recommendations for further actions and initiatives to support our DEI statement. At the June National Board meeting, we accepted the report, which is the product of over a year's worth comprising of meetings, surveys, and research by nearly 50 individuals, including ARCS board members, ARCS National Board members, committee members, chapter members, current scholars, scholar alums, and university partners. The board then approved the incorporation of the DEI definitions developed by the DEI Task Force into the organizational and governance structure of the ARCS Foundation. The definitions are: diversity includes the range of all human differences. Equity is the state of fairness that results in access for all. Inclusion is the practice of creating open environments for all. Just to point out a couple things we learned as the task force completed their work, DEI initiatives are very important to companies and foundation funders. They are looking to see what actions organizations are doing to support their DEI statement. We must show our actions. Then from the scholar survey, we heard that some of our scholars feel underrepresented in their field of study and are struggling. They're asking for help through mentorship and networking opportunities. Although the DEI recommendations are mainly embedded into national, our hope is that the chapters will consider implementing some of the recommendations, but the recommendations are not mandatory. There are some chapters who do not see the value of the DEI initiative for a variety of reasons. National has the challenge of educating its members as to why we need to increase diversity in our membership and our leadership. National also has the challenge to monitor the DEI initiative in all of our work. Permanent resident issue. U.S. citizenship restriction for ARCS funding has become a huge challenge for National and the chapters. Oregon is no exception. Let me briefly tell you what's happening at Oregon State University. I'm a trustee of the Oregon State University Foundation, and a few years ago, the university began updating language in their endowments to comply with a Supreme Court ruling. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that the due process and equal protection clauses of the United States Constitution apply to citizens and lawfully admitted resident aliens, also called permanent residents. This means that any organization receiving state or federal funds, essentially all nonprofit colleges and universities, public or private, cannot discriminate against or deny benefits to permanent residents. As stated by the OSU Foundation attorney, the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Education launched an inquiry into scholarship restrictions at OSU in 2019. At that time, I asked if this would affect ARCS Scholar Awards, and they felt they had a temporary workaround. The OSU Foundation contacted the University of Washington to see how they were dealing with Seattle's matched endowments. They also had a temporary workaround, so everything was quiet for a while. Then in 2021, Provost and General Counsel of OSU made an institutional-wide policy to support permanent residents. Because of the case law, the university felt they too had a legal risk restricting awards to just U.S. citizens. This was confusing to the deans and associate deans of the 7 colleges at Oregon State that we support, and they were afraid they could not continue with ARCS Scholar Awards. In March, Ann Jarvis, Lori Slaughter, and I met with Phil Moat, the Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School, and the Associate Deans from the Colleges of Engineering, Science, and Agricultural Sciences, and Kristen Watkins, the Vice President, Donor Engagement, and Chief Marketing Officer at OSU Foundation. They were originally under the impression that Oregon alone could make the decision to fund permanent residents. I explained this is an issue that needs to be addressed at the national level and gave them a history of how the permanent resident issue impacted some of the other chapters. According to the General Counsel at OSU Foundation, this is just a fact of numbers to make you understand exactly how many people would be dealing with. A permanent resident is not a large population of the university. Only 1.6% of the 2018 total OSU student population were permanent residents. 87.3 were U.S. citizens. This issue first surfaced in 2014 when ARCS National and the Roche Foundation jointly offered a unique program to support outstanding graduate life science students who are U.S. citizens at universities across the United States. The University of Colorado, the University of Minnesota, the Pennsylvania State University raised issue with the U.S. citizenship restriction in the agreement. They all found a temporary workaround, but it was very challenging. Shortly after that, Penn State University said they would no longer accept awards from Pittsburgh chapter, and the partnership ended. The Pittsburgh chapter asked National to consider offering awards to permanent residents. A task force was formed, governments got involved, and since there were temporary workarounds at their other universities, National made no further recommendations. This was a very contentious time between Pittsburgh and National. I had briefly heard that other chapters were dealing with this as well. Since this topic hadn't been addressed in years, I met with the Council of Presidents on May 9th to discuss the permanent resident topic. Prior to the meeting, I reached out to each chapter president to see how widespread the issue had become. The poll indicated that 9 out of 15 chapters have been approached by their universities to consider changing to add permanent residents. Those include Colorado, Honolulu, Illinois, Minnesota, Orange County, Oregon, Pittsburgh, Seattle, and Utah. Knowing that I wanted to implement a SWOT analysis exercise with the national board and the chapter boards, I knew this topic would bubble up. The permanent resident issue also bubbled up during the DEI task force research. National cannot sweep this under the rug any longer. If we lose our universities, we are out of business. Some chapters will not even consider supporting permanent residents, but it is an extremely hot and controversial issue. I will talk later about how we're going to deal with this. So we're leading some changes at National. In addition to addressing whoops, I better change this. Okay. In addition to addressing a declining membership this next fiscal year, ARCS National is moving forward on multiple initiatives. The DEI initiative, best practices, strategic plan beginning in 2023, and permanent resident. So under the DEI initiative, last week the National Board did approve adding Chair of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion as a National Board position along with a DEI Standing Committee. Recommendations from the task force will be incorporated into the strategic planning process. There are recommendations that will move forward this year. The newly formed DEI Standing Committee has over 16 members who are really eager to begin their work. It is National's hope that every chapter elect a DEI chair to their board to further the initiative. National has collaboration networks for membership, communications, philanthropy, IS, university relations, scholar relations, event and programs where we meet with chapter counterparts to network and brainstorm. Either a member of the DEI committee will attend these meetings or we will create another collaboration network to cover DEI. Best practices. ARCS National has never belonged to a professional organization to inspire best practices. The executive committee gave me authority to join BoardSource, which is a recognized leader in nonprofit research, leadership, and support. We are empowering ARCS with a membership to BoardSource to provide and share best practices with the chapters. Strategic planning for 2022-23. Well, the planning. The plan itself will be longer than 1 year. This fiscal year, the Long Range Planning Committee will develop a new strategic plan that will begin in July 2023. I'm pleased to say that Susan Smith will be co-chairing the Long Range Planning Committee, and Ann Jarvis will be taking a major role in this process. 4 initiatives will be incorporated into the plan. We did a SWOT analysis. In preparation for the new plan, we conducted the first ever SWOT analysis exercise with the National Board and the chapter boards. From this analysis, we can identify themes around ARC's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. DEI recommendations will also be incorporated into the long-range plan. An external advisory council recommendation from the task force who examined the previous advisory council will also be part of the plan. The Enterprise Risk Management Plan. This is something new. Corporations and foundations are developing enterprise risk management plans to be ready for when a crisis emerges. Discussions have become such with a subgroup, discussions have begun with a subgroup to help move this initiative forward. The Enterprise Risk Management Plan will begin at the national level and can serve as a model for the chapters. This effort will also be aligned with the long-range planning process. With all these initiatives converging together at the same time at National, we are also needing to hire a consultant or facilitator to help us with the process. So we've allowed money in our budget to do this. We are already working with a gentleman from Atlanta who is helping us look at names and companies that could maybe help us. We'll be sending out an RFP fairly soon. Permanent resident issue. After presenting the permanent resident issue to the executive committee on several occasions, I expressed an interest in conducting preliminary research with universities who are making this request. I plan to meet with the chapter presidents to discuss next steps. Once we gather information from the universities, I want to create a task force to clarify all the misinformation that surrounds the topic. NSF and NIH now make grants to permanent residents, where in the past they did not. One question you're probably asking yourself, is National taking on too much? My answer is no. We must address these issues to survive, and we've got the people to make it happen. Thank you. Oh, and I just have one. Yes, can I just show one slide here? Okay, I added this slide last night, but I thought it's a definition of what a permanent resident is, and I thought it'd be helpful for you to read and understand the definition. So, yes. Oh, you can't see it? Oh, goodness. Okay, I don't have it on my paper. Let me turn this around here. Okay. A permanent resident is a non-citizen who is authorized by law to live in the United States permanently, as long as the permanent resident complies with an annual application and approval process. They may receive financial assistance at public colleges and universities, pay taxes, may own property, is eligible to serve in the armed forces, and may accept employment without special restrictions. Is often on a path to citizenship. Naturalization as a citizen requires years of lawful resident status. If a donor asks, permanent residents are also known as green card holders or resident aliens. If a donor asks, permanent residents are not required to renounce the citizenship of their country of origin. A permanent resident is not a person who is in the U.S. without documentation to support immigration status. A deferred action of childhood arrivals, DACA recipient. And then I just have here a large population of the university population, only 1.6% of the 2018 total OSU student population were permanent residents. Yes.
Up until 5 years ago, I was a permanent resident. I'm glad it didn't stop me from getting ARCS.
I am too.
But I wanted to ask you if DEI and the permanent resident issue, there's definitely seems to me to be a crossover there.
There is.
Do you think that, for example, we are creating an ad hoc DEI committee? Do you think that that's a good place for us to begin our discussions about permanent?
It could be part of it, yes. Any other questions? Yes, Anne?
So, I don't understand why this is, the permanent resident issue is an issue. I also would think that it could jeopardize our nonprofit status if the feds are saying you have to include these people. So I don't know what the controversy is.
Some of the chapters have an older membership.
Yeah.
They see they keep going back to when our founders started ARCS. It's originally, yes.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue. They president say my business. Right. So it's a very, very hot topic. I know Joan is chair of university relations at National, and they've talked with the university committee members of the various chapters. Joan, do you have anything you'd like to share in regard to that, or no?
Only to say that what you say, Karen, so true, and that even members of our committee, we're kind of West Coast heavy demographically.
Mm-hmm.
So we seem more progressive in that way, but we have other members who have said, they quote what are the 3 requirements to be an ARCS scholar? U.S. citizenship, full-time enrollment, 3.5 GPA. And there's spectrum. I mean, it is an original sort of bringing going, but they are, it is a very contentious issue, and during my time on national, it has come up previously, and it was just as hot then as it seems that it is hot now.
Mm-hmm.
But I totally agree, and my other co-VP, Kristen and Brent, we agree that it's something that needs to be dealt with, and we're so glad that National's taking it on.
Well, if you want to talk to me later, I know we've got to move on, but I'm happy to discuss this with any of you. So, thank you.
Should I advance this?
Actually, I need to go back.
Oh, okay.
I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Karen clearly is the one to lead this charge, but I encourage all of you to provide her with support because, as she says, this is a contentious issue. I want to welcome Dr. Sarah Stebbins, who will lead a lot of today's discussions. She is a certified professional coach who is a leadership coach and change management consultant. She also is agnostic. She is both a beaver and a duck. So let's welcome her.
And a Montana grizzly.
And a Montana grizzly.
All right. Thanks, Ann. Appreciate it. Well, good morning to you all. Karen, wow. I admire what you're taking on, and it was very enlightening for me to listen to all of this. I had no idea permanent residency was such a contentious topic. My goodness, pretty amazing. Well, this is about change, and so I'm changing things up. I'm gonna back up. Oh, sure I am. Oh, come on. Don't do this to me. Okay, wait a minute. I think I got it. Let me just talk very briefly about what we're going to be doing today. The main topic today is about change. You all are change agents. Whether you want to take that role or not, you are. Because of the leadership that you've displayed on your committees, you're going to be carrying forth the work of the organization. And this means bringing the people on your committees along with you. And in order to help you better understand your role as a change agent, we need to spend a little bit of time talking about change concepts, a little bit of time talking about our own personal reactions to change. So we're going to spend some time doing that. Explain the difference between strategic and operational thinking. You know, I am amazed at what this organization has accomplished since 2004. It's astounding. You all have been operating almost like a corporate entity in operations and doing all of this work. Fabulous. And now it's time to think a little bit differently. And we want to explore today the differences between strategic and operational thinking, kind of prepare you for that. And then we're going to have you learn a little bit about part of the strategic thinking is to take a look at the purpose of your committee and how you want to move it forward. And this is done through something called a committee charter. And you're going to have a chance to do some hands-on work with that today. What today represents is the culmination of all the preparation work we've done up to this point, with the assessment, the board presentation, and here we are at the retreat. But it may signify an ending, but it also signifies the beginning of an incredible journey that this organization is on. And I just want to reiterate again, I do this work, I've been doing this work for the last 25 years or so, and I'm amazed. Most of the time I get called in after a change initiative has gone off the rails. And believe me, that's kind of like closing the barn door after the horse got out. And you know what's left behind. It's sorry, Lori. Anyway, I much prefer being on the front end of a change initiative, and that's where you are. So we're going to have a chance to work together in some really positive ways here, and I'm very excited for today because this is you're on the launching pad. It's very, very exciting. So that's what we are about. These are the objectives for the day. Oh, come on, please. Wah. Up, 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 heap, hop. Here we go. Okay, did that, won't do that. Okay, this little cartoon, I just love it. I love showing this because, you know, who wants change? Of course, everybody thinks money, they put their hands up, but who wants to change? And everybody's looking down at the floor. And I don't know what it is about change. It seems to be an evil thing. I wrote a book about this recently, and what I've come to understand really is that change is nothing more than an event. It usually has a start and a stop. It's the emotional attachment that we place to that change. That's what we're dealing with. It's not the change. It's our own emotional reactions to change. So I want to talk a little bit about, and you have handouts, by the way, in your folder. This is not going to work. Would you like to advance them for me, Lori? You have in your folder some handouts that you can take notes on. The first concept that I want to talk about comes from the work of William Bridges. He was the one that advanced the idea that change is an event, and transition is really what we're dealing with, the emotional response, or what he calls the psychological reorientation to change. And he talks about this psychological reorientation in 3 stages. The first one has to do with endings. If we're going to move forward, we have to be able to say goodbye to something. I remember years ago I was involved in a merger, and I was involved in the merger. What the story I'm going to tell you is about a move. We were moving the corporate headquarters from one building to another building. Significant change. We took up 8 floors in the high-rise building, and we were moving over to a separate building that the corporation owned. Big remodel, huge change. And it was amazing to me how people were resisting leaving. And so what we did was we put panels of butcher paper up outside the elevators. And up at the top it said, what I'm saying goodbye to. On the other one it said, what I'm saying hello to. In the middle panel it showed, we drew a cartoon of our CEO driving the moving truck. And we left some felt tip pens by these sheets. So when people got off the elevator and looked at them, they go, they could get up there and write them. We did this on all 8 floors. It was amazing to me how therapeutic that was. People were saying goodbye to things, the shopping and the restaurants and all of these things, but it stimulated their thinking about what they had to look forward to. Okay? So really what I'm saying here is we got to say goodbye. What is ARCS saying goodbye to? And it'll be a different kind of work that will replace it. Yes? Good point. Very good. That's not such a bad thing, huh? Yeah.
I think there's a loss of control.
Ah!
Just worry about that.
Yes. Loss of control. But what's the flip side of that? Freedom. There you go. There you go. So I think it's important for you and your committees to really have a conversation about this. What are we saying goodbye to? And are we willing to let go of it? Okay? Now, what's interesting about this is, you see the new beginning up here? We have an idea of what the new beginning is, but it's not real clear yet. We're just kind of moving ahead, and we're building it as we go, right? Now, that's the good news. The bad news is that for those of us who need to have a clear understanding of where we're headed, this is going to be uncomfortable. Okay? This is going to be uncomfortable. Change is wonderful, but it's really messy. I want to just give you that news right now. It's very, very messy. So where the messiness shows up is right here. You can go ahead and click on the new beginning. right here in the neutral zone. Or as a manager said to me about 6 months ago, Sarah, this isn't the neutral zone, it's the nuclear zone. There is, affectionately call this the emotional pea soup of change. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide. This is what's going on in the neutral zone. When a change is announced, this isn't going to happen to me. It's not going to impact me. We get into this place of denial. I remember so well when I started working in corporate healthcare. Just landed my job for the first time, and then I heard that a merger was going through. I was so far down on the org chart, there's no way this is going to impact me. Ha! Overnight, my responsibilities changed 150% of the long story, and I won't bore you with it. But the point is, it's not unusual to get into this place of denial. If I just keep my head down, it'll be done, and I won't have to worry about it. When we start waking up to the fact that it is going to impact us, it's not unusual for us to feel some resistance. You can click on these arrows. I think I've got some, on resistance. And inside larger organizations, this resistance shows up as all kinds of interesting things. Cartoons in the lunchroom that are very sarcastic about what's going on. Sabotaging systems. This happens in high tech a lot. People used to be horrified over the fact that security personnel would escort a person who's going to be losing their high tech job back to their desk so that they don't sabotage the systems while they're checking out. You find a lot of resume writing in resistance. So you can't have change without resistance. I'm just telling you that right now. It's going to happen. And so what we want to be able to do, obviously, is help people work through that. Now, the thing that I tell senior managers all the time is change equals attrition. There will be attrition. There will be some people who will say, you know what, I really can't make this work for me. That's okay. That's okay. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen in ARCS. I'm talking about just in general. Don't be surprised if it happens. I'm actually president of a board right now, and we're going through significant change because of COVID. We've already lost 2 board members because we have decided that we're going to have to be a hybrid organization. And these 2 individuals said, no, don't want to do it. Well, I would rather they move on and be happy than to stay and fight us tooth and nail over what we're trying to create. All right? This is the downside, but this is resistance that we have to meet head on. Now, as we start getting some clarity around what the future looks like, we enter the exploration phase. And the big question that people need to answer here is, how can I make this work for me? How can I make this change work for me? We all listen to the same radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? And it's really critical to be able to respond to that. Okay, so we start seeing, start developing an understanding of how this is going to work for us, and then we start committing. Now, what I have found in my own research is that the commitment is to the work, not necessarily to the organization. And I'm not saying that this is true for ARCS. But any large organization that has gone through a major change, the level of organizational commitment is difficult to get back, because if people have not been involved in making that change happen, they feel like it's being done to them, and as a result, they lose trust in the organization. So this commitment piece is the commitment to the work that they're doing, but not necessarily to the organization. Very important to keep that in mind. Okay, so this is what's going on in the neutral zone. The emotional pea soup. Let's move on to the next slide. And I want you to kind of go on this 35,000-foot level journey with me as I talk about this change curve. Obviously, this is a normal curve. This particular concept, change concept, was developed by a statistician from the University of Wisconsin named George Box. He was hired by the high-tech industry, this was years ago, to determine how quickly people will adapt to a new piece of technology. Well, I took a look at this research and I went, this is all about change. So I went ahead and I swiped the model and I just kind of put my own spin on it. And this is what I see inside organizations. When a change is announced, you're going to have folks who are, you want to click on it? The early adopters. These are the folks that are going to jump on board. Greatest thing since sliced bread, let's just do it. And these folks you want to leverage, for sure. You want to click on the next one? But the majority of people fall into the gonna wait and see. I'm not necessarily for it, and I'm not necessarily against it. I need more information. I'm going to kind of observe, see what's going on. And then, way over on the left-hand side, and this is compliments of my father, by the way. He was a cuddly curmudgeon. And he loved it. He loved his role. Anyway, so I call these the cuddly curmudgeons. These are the folks, and many of them resist change no matter what it is. Now, not all of them. Some of them will just resist a given change but be on board with others. And that's the important thing about this particular graphic. This is not linear. I could be an early adopter for a change, and you come to me and say, Sarah, we're going to work on this next change that's coming down the pike, and I hear what it is, and all of a sudden I'm in the gonna wait and see camp. Or I might be a cuddly curmudgeon. This is a very fluid, very, very fluid process. Very fluid. It's important to understand this because, as I said to in a training program I delivered yesterday, we as change agents need to be aware of who is falling into what camp. Not that we want to label people, but that we know how to leverage their interest. The early adopters we want to leverage. As a manager, if I spent all my time trying to convince the cuddly curmudgeons to get on board, what's going to happen to the early adopters and the gonna wait and see folks? Going to lose them. Yeah. So the early adopters can play a very large role just by their enthusiasm and by the work that they're doing on the change, can do a lot to bring those gonna wait and see folks along. Okay? And I, as a manager, I'm stuck with having to do some one-on-one work with the cuddly curmudgeons. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about the kinds of questions that one could ask of a person who is somewhat resistant to kind of bring them along. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. So let me just pause for just 1 second. Questions on these three concepts. Does it make sense? Okay. Yes?
Do these kinds of things happen even if you explain why you need to change?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because we have an emotional response to change, and not everybody has the same emotional response, how information gets through changes as well. So if I am explaining to you, Tulitha, yes, this change is coming, I'm going to have to tell her in different ways more than once. I have to deliver a consistent message. And this is something that I have talked to Elizabeth and Ann and Lori about. A consistent message as you're moving forward is going to be important. One cannot over-communicate during times of change. We're talking a long-term transition here. People are going to get tired. We need to communicate about what's happening. Does that help? Yeah, Lori.
I'm sitting here wondering, in a corporate scenario, someone's piece of cheese is that they have a job and that they are maintaining a lifestyle. We are dealing in our organization with volunteers.
Correct.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was just asking Sarah about
So in a corporate setting, people's motivations are around keeping their jobs, and so they may have a different view of change and whether or not they're going to jump in or be the cuddly curmudgeon. In a volunteer setting, are there any pieces of advice that you can share with us about how we motivate people who don't have to be here at all?
You remind them of the mission and the strategic objectives. That's why they're there. They believe passionately about the organization. And that's where you have to, that's the motivator, okay? I have no other way of saying it other than that. But that's true in the corporate world as well. If you are aligned with a mission, if your own values are aligned with a mission, why wouldn't you want to be here? Okay? So, yes?
I think it's important to focus, though, on not only what the mission is, but how does it get accomplished?
Absolutely.
And so if you're aligned with the mission, but how the mission is being accomplished doesn't feel comfortable to you for ethics reasons or, whatever, I think people leave they can be very much aligned to the mission and go to another organization with a similar mission that has a different way of achieving that mission.
Julie, you're spot on. Absolutely. That's true. That's very, very true. I totally support what you said. Yep. Any other questions before we move on? What I'd like to have you do, this is a nice segue, I think, into this conversation. At your table, how have you experienced these change elements in your own life? How have they shown up in your volunteer work with ARCS? And if you can just spend a few minutes talking about this and kind of summarize your points, we'll just do a very quick around the room and share. So why don't you spend a few minutes and talk about this? How are we doing? Okay.
Just so the people on the other end can hear it.
Got it.
Video.
Thank you. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to wrap up what you're talking about, and then we'll do a quick share. Okay. I'm going to call time because I'd love to hear from you. We've got a microphone here. What kinds of aha moments came up in your conversation? Does anybody want to share one or two conclusions that you draw from this conversation about change? Yeah, go ahead. Here.
At our table, we initially.
Here you go. Whoops. Wait, Ann. There you go. Go ahead.
At our table, we initially talked about somebody transferring a job from city to city and coming home to the spouse and saying, "Guess what, honey? We're moving to Dubuque, Iowa." and that kind, I mean, you lose control of the situation, probably.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
Yes, you do.
And we also tried to bring it back to ARCS, and we were talking about the DEI challenge ahead of us.
Yeah.
Which is, I think,
It's significant.
is very significant
Yeah.
for this state. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, right here. And then I'll come on over.
Leanne and I are a small group, but mighty, right? So we've all had change in our lives. We've all experienced having to adapt. We're committed to the mission and the goals of ARCS. We find the work very rewarding, and it's worth the change.
Yeah. It's worth it. Right. Great. Thank you, Joan. Appreciate it. Diana?
Yeah, a couple things. Anne mentioned, it's hard for us to understand, being scientists, living in the science world, how change can be so difficult because that's kind of what we do. Things are going to change, right? And I was really struck by what Nancy asked too, and I know she just did that kind of tongue in cheek because, of course, we've all experienced this change curve. And when I first saw this curve, I said to Anne, "Well, gosh, this is just like the COVID vaccine, right? I mean, you're early adapters, and you've got your people who are going to wait and see, and then you've got your people who are going to be cuddly curmudgeons throughout." And we've really lived this curve here, and I see it in my work. Talking with the public about biomedical research, and same exact grouping. You've got your early adapters who are way on board with it, totally understand it, get it, support it. People who are going to, wait and see about this. And I just had a tour last night, in fact, where a woman was very concerned about everything, and then all of a sudden you saw the light bulb go on, and she said, "Oh my gosh, my mom died of breast cancer, and I had the same breast cancer, and I was cured." Oh, okay, I get it. And and now she totally understands. I mean, it's just that it's going to be something different for everybody, and it is a really difficult thing to find that something. And I guess that's our challenge.
Yeah. So that's the challenge, indeed. One last comment before we move on. Yeah.
Thanks. And we also acknowledged that we've all dealt with change, and it's really the loss of control that gets to us in terms of having, whether it's a health challenge or whatever it is in our personal lives. We talked, because Karen's at our table, she was reminding, and you just heard, there's an awful lot of resistance at national, and we all need to help her with those changes. The other thing we touched on was permanent residence. Kathleen was just saying that it's interesting to hear the discussion about resistance to permanent residence when I just I'm sort of a positive person who imagines that, well, people don't do that. It's a lot of trouble. They're not going to do that unless they are on a pathway. But I suppose there are other perspectives, and we need to honor those.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, you know, it doesn't take very many curmudgeons. You want to click over to the next slide, Lori? And just click through them. It doesn't take very many curmudgeons to sink a change initiative. I hear this a lot. We've always done it this way. But you know, organizational resistance is really about individual resistance. And there's some research that I think will pinpoint why resistance exists. Let's go to the next slide, Lori. The first one, this comes out of some research that was done in 2012. I find it very interesting that I went to this company and took a look at the research that they did just 2 years ago. The list hasn't changed. Okay, go ahead. Fear of losing control and authority. We talked about that already, right? Next one. Comfort with the status quo. I've been hearing a little bit of that already in the work with ARCS. Well, gee, you know, it's just really fun to get together with people and talk and, you know, do the work. And that's going to get changed a little bit. So the status quo. Next. Lack of time. We can't afford not to invest the time now to make this transition. Go ahead. Listening to station WIIFM, we just talked about that. And lack of engagement in developing a solution, this is key. You are going to be working with your committees and keeping them engaged, and we're going to help you do that. But the more engagement you have on the part of your committee members, the easier it's going to be. Change is not a smooth ride. It isn't. But it is made smoother with the level of engagement that you have with your committee members. I can't emphasize that enough. So go ahead. I want to just share very quickly something that I learned when I went down the Colorado River. Go ahead and click it. For 7 days, we were bounding through the rapids. And needless to say, we were wet most of the time. And on this one particular day, we came into a sort of a flat area of the river. And we were exhausted. After the pounding waves, we were soaking wet. Well, there was a squall line coming down the canyon. All of a sudden, we were just absolutely dumped on with the rain. And the first thing that I noticed, and I was part of this too, everybody was scrambling around looking for their rain gear. And I sat back and I started to laugh. And I thought to myself, well, the rain is warmer than the river water. And so while everybody else was tearing through their packs looking for their rain gear, I just kind of sat back and let the water just sort of wash the grime off of me. And I had a big lesson about acceptance. It is a whole lot easier. We may not agree with a change, but if we can just accept the fact that it's happening, then we can divert our energy into how to either make it work or make other choices. But so much of the resistance that I see has to do with the change event itself. Why can't we just accept it just is? And so many mid-level managers are being asked, are being told to initiate change. They don't always agree with it, and they fight it. But if they could just say, well, okay, this is just the way it is, what are we going to do with it? It makes life a lot easier. So I just want to say that if we can at least get people to the point of, it is what it is, and how can we move on, that's going to be a major step. That's going to be a big step. Okay, let's move on. All right, I'm going to pause. Maybe you can darken the screen at that point. Whew. We're on a fast track here. Covered a lot of material. This is why I have the handouts for you. We're going to take a bit of a break. About how many minutes? Are we 15? 10? Let's do a 10-minute break. The restrooms, if you haven't found them, are on the opposite side of the building over here. Let's come back in 10 minutes and we'll get into this next piece. And I am here to answer questions. I'm not going anywhere. If you want to ask me some questions, that would be fine too. Okay?
We're going to get started again here in just a minute. So if you all want to grab a beverage, thank you.
He's earned his keep today.
Batteries, my goodness. Comes prepared.
I'm going to invite you to all come on back in and have a seat. So I want to call your attention to page 9 in your handouts, which is called Leading Change, Asking Key Questions. I recognize that this is a little out of sequence, but I want to call your attention to this sheet. These are questions that I think can provoke some good conversation in your committee meetings when you feel as though the group perhaps is not with you or is kind of struggling a little bit with whatever it is that you're talking about. First question: what thoughts, beliefs, routines are no longer useful and should be left in the past? This is that what are we letting go question. If you stepped aside and brought in the best volunteer candidate to replace you, what would they do differently to get better results? That's heavy. And you can rephrase these if you think that the wording is a little too harsh, but you get the intention here. And how can you start doing that immediately? And I would say, rather than using you, just say, how can the committee start doing it immediately? What is one thing we can do right now, and by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? These are provocative questions. They're very provocative questions. But our job is to kind of shake things up and get people thinking. And these questions can do that. So I just wanted to offer that as a resource. Well, I want to move on to this thing called strategic thinking. You know, I believe all of us have the ability to think big picture, and most of the time we are thinking from an operational standpoint of how we're going to get things done and the task at hand. And sometimes it's difficult to step back and take a look at the big picture. So what I want to do is just do a very brief overview. And you have this, again, in your handouts, I believe. On page 7, maybe? Anyway, page 7, thank you. So what I want to do is just do a very quick comparison here between strategic thinking and operational thinking. Strategy is future focused. Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? What is the nature of our business? What is the nature of our organization? I mean, you've got your mission and your strategic objectives quite well defined. They're very future-focused. The what's and the whys of why we're doing what we're doing. Operations, on the other hand, is very present-focused. And I certainly find this in the organizations that I work with. Everybody is focused on getting the job done at hand. Absolutely. And sometimes, especially coming out of COVID, it's hard to think strategically because we're still trying to scramble to get our work done. But it's very present focused. It focuses on the hows, on productivity. Strategy is about doing the right things, and operations is about doing things right. Strategy is about drawing the map, and operations is about driving the vehicle. Make sense? And I love this quote by Bob McCullough from, this is where I got this material. Without operational thinking, there would be no strategy, and without strategy, there would be nothing to guide operational thinking. We got to be able to do both. We got to be able to do both. So I think that it is absolutely critical for us to start shifting our thinking a little bit. On page 8 in your handouts, you have what I call a strategic versus operational exercise. And what we're asking you to do is for each of the following functions, and these are functions that ARCS, the committees perform, want you to identify, put a check mark if it's strategic in your mind or if it's operational. And I'd like to have you take a few minutes and go ahead and fill this out and then share at the table what you came up with. And then we'll talk about it. Okay?
on.
Not had an opportunity to compare notes. Uh, uh, Compare notes among yourselves about what you checked and where you place things. Because when we're done, when you're all done with that, we're going to do a large group debrief on this and talk about it. In wandering around the room, I've been hearing some very interesting comments about where these are placed. And whether, well, anyway, I'm tilting my hand a little bit. Anyway, this is going to be a great conversation. So if you haven't had a chance to compare with the other members of your group, please do that now. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about it. Yes?
Is it a cop-out to mark something as both? Is it cheating?
No, it's not cheating, but I'm not saying it's right or wrong either. I'm hearing that a lot.
It's an opportunity for co-creation.
Yes. You've got about 3 minutes to finish up, and then we'll talk about it.
I didn't see it, Sarah, so he said just go with it.
Initially, I thought the microphone was gone. Yep. All right, I'm going to call time. We're going to spend some time kind of debriefing this right now. So I feel like I'm going to be Vanna White up here asking for a response. Recording donations and membership dues, is that strategic or operations? Awesome! Day-to-day financial transactions. Nicely. Fundraising.
Heck yeah.
Okay. Data management and reporting. Oh, we're getting some unanimity here. This is great. Event planning. I heard operations and I heard both. That's what I heard. For those of you that think it's both, Lori, why don't you give somebody the microphone and we want to hear why. Thank you, Linda.
Well, I do think event planning is both, or should be, because event planning should be toward a strategic goal.
Okay.
And otherwise, you're just doing hit and misses. Everything should be going in the ultimately add up in the same direction.
Okay.
But then, of course, you've got the individual operation. How do you execute this?
Yep.
But again, the ultimate strategy is what that event is supposed to produce.
Okay. Very good. Lori, you got a comment?
Totally agree. Leanne and I are in agreement with event planning with you all.
So for those of you that said both, it's a gold star! Okay. Well done. Internal and external communications. Okay. Very good. Long-term strategic oversight and planning. That's a gimme. All right. Ensure mission is aligned with chapter programs. Very good. Institutional sustainability and solvency. We heard both over here. Let's hear it. passing the microphone back and forth.
Karen. No, you go, Todd.
It's the planning, and we're talking about sustainability.
Right.
So when it comes to sustainability, that really implies longer range planning and needs to, as Linda was saying earlier about the other one, needs to tie into the strategic goals.
Okay,
So it's both.
so it's both. You think it's both? Okay, Lori, what do you think?
I mean, I typically see it as a strategic oversight, giving direction to staff about how we are going to go about becoming or maintaining our solvency and keeping the revenue streams at a certain level. So it yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, it could be both for ARCS, absolutely.
So the conversation will have to happen, bringing clarity around that if it's going to be both, what does that look like? So, good. All right. Legal, tax, and compliance.
Elizabeth?
Well, oversight, for sure. I mean, the board needs to make sure that it's being done. Right. But in our case, we employ an outside firm, and we just expect you to make sure that it gets done. Clear?
Clear. Just please check behind me on the 990s. Please.
Financial oversight.
Anybody want to argue a case?
Who said both? Yeah, go for it.
I'll come back to you and Aletha.
Oh, well, I said both. On a lot of these where it says both, it's like I assume that a plan is needed to do the action, but without the plan, you can't just have the action, and you can't just have the action without the plan. So that was kind of why I would put both.
Lori, what do you think?
If you just look at the word just oversight, does that change your mind? Like if you just say, I'm just looking to be sure it's getting done right.
But the oversight has to follow a plan.
Right. But it doesn't say planning and oversight, it just says oversight.
But a lot of these, like what was one?
Well, like long-term strategic
Like-
oversight and planning.
Well, like fundraising. Fundraising is an action, but without a plan, you can't just have the actions.
Well, that makes sense then. Yes, I see this.
So that's kind of what.
Yeah, if we're gonna do it there.
Consistency.
Yeah, that is true. We probably should be consistent.
So are
Our
we-
treasurer speaks.
Yeah, our treasurer.
Well, I definitely see it as board responsibility, and I would not just treasurer responsibility. I would like to emphasize. I mean, I think we all understand that we have a fiduciary responsibility as board members, and therefore we should all be reading the financials in the control or consent agenda, and getting oversight. And I personally could not be president of an organization if I didn't have financial oversight, because I don't want to put myself in that position. I mean, we have lots of insurance, nobody should panic, but and I can tell you that our financials are in great shape in terms of how well transactions are managed and so on, but it's totally board responsibility. Strategic, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of separation of duties. So if our staff are responsible for all the financial transactions, then we need oversight. We need to make sure that, it's so easy for a check to fall off a desk or into a garbage can, so we really need to be checking those deposits, that the bills are are bona fide expenses. Yeah, it has to happen. We can't just have, yeah. Right. Operationally, it's staff and bookkeeper and CPA, but oversight is definitely our responsibility. I feel.
All right.
Yeah, the state of Oregon also feels the same way because as a board member, you are legally you're the fiduciary, so you have a legal responsibility for financial oversight. Aletha, did you have something to add?
Very good.
It's always the money discussions that get the most attention.
How about, oops,
Sarah.
one more, go ahead.
I think some of the disagreement here is coming over, does the board do it or does the staff do it? So when we're saying strategic or operational, we're thinking, is the board strategic and is the staff operational? So if you can accept those, I've been assuming that's the case.
You're correct.
Okay.
And I'm sorry.
That might make it easier.
And we have our checks and balances.
Good point, Nancy. Strategy is board and operations is more staff.
Yep. Great. How about sending thank you letters to donors?
I do that.
Great. All right. Okay, here we go. Investment oversight. Given our previous conversation, what do you think? Strategic. Yep. Website management.
Karen Ogg.
I say both. I say both.
Both?
I would say both because website to internal is a different message than website to external, reaching people who don't know about ARCS. So I think there's a dual role in the website.
Okay.
Content is generated by members often, or board.
Okay.
But I think the word is management, and that's the nitty-gritty and nuts and bolts of it. The next one down, production of marketing, that's both to me. I'm skipping ahead. But
That's
to
all
me,
right.
There has to be a plan, and then the management needs to be done by somebody who's gonna be doing it forever.
Very good. How about alumni tracking and relations?
I put both, and I'll tell you why, because I think the tracking is operational, but the strategic connections with the scholars, the ongoing relation with the scholars is much more strategic. It's future members, it's having scholars hook up with different chapters when they move to Chicago or whatnot. So I think if you're looking at alumni tracking, it's clearly operational, but I think the relations carries much more strategic intent.
Okay. So it may be that some of these have to be redefined.
Yeah, and I would also add, with a supportive system, we need that now to do what you're talking about, to do that important work, Julie. Yes.
The purpose of keeping track of scholars and alumni, there's a strategic purpose.
Good. All right, we talked about, I think, production of marketing and communication materials we said was operational. Okay. Ensure consistency in workflows and processes. I heard both and I heard operational. Who said it was both? And can you defend? Yep.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Hang on.
Like, you have to have a plan on how to do things efficiently, right? I don't know. I keep thinking that for a lot of these, you need a plan in place. And so if you need a plan in place, if one is not in place, then it's strategic. And then
Because what's the efficiency measured against?
Okay,
So that's why I put both.
all right. Again, I mean, I'm not saying yay or nay on any of these, but what it suggests to me is that some of these have to be further defined. A little bit more clarity around what these mean, because go ahead, you had a question?
Maybe part of that clarity is like, what do we have in place? So it is just a matter of operations.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from this piece of the conversation and your perspective, is that if we do have functional processes in place, then maybe not everyone knows that they exist.
Aha.
I think that's true. I think Leanne would nod on that one. I'm going to nod. So there are gaps that exist in our processes right now that we need to fill. And then we also need to look at what we have and see if that's efficient. And once we get to that place, I think we can move into full operational functioning. But we're in the teenage years right now. It's awkward. We don't know what's going on. Yeah. But no, you're a good example because we just, yeah. Thank you for sharing.
All right. And the last one is board training and development. Strategic. Well done. Give yourselves a hand. Woo! Good work. Well, we will be revisiting all of this in the future, probably sometime in the fall. But this is just a kind of a dip into, if you will, strategic versus operational, and making it come alive with regards to ARCS. Okay, we are coming up on lunch. Hallelujah, right? I'm going to turn it over to Lori.
So I have a couple of housekeeping things to share. So lunch, as you can probably see, is being served or has been served in the back. So please feel free to get up and make a sandwich and a salad. So we will also be starting our board meeting, which will be going on from 12:15 to 1. So if you're a board member or you're curious and you want to sit in on the board meeting, that will just be right next door. So just go out and go into the room next door, and we will be voting on several important initiatives. And yes. Both. Yes, both. If you are or will be a board member. Absolutely. Good point, Julie. If you want to just come, there are plenty of chairs in there for everyone if you want to go sit through that. Absolutely. Good question. Elizabeth asked if you can bring your lunch with you, so please do that. And then we'll. What?
Do you want a tchotchke? You're the tchotchke queen. So
Yeah, Aletha was very kind to bring leftover tchotchkes. I don't know what else to call them. Merch. There you go. That's the new term, merch. So they're on the table out there. So help yourself